Good morning. I'm Bob Bixby, Executive Director of the Concord Coalition. Welcome to our virtual discussion this morning, working towards a sustainable fiscal future in a divided Congress. It features three of the Concord Coalition's 2023 Economic Patriot Award nominees, honorees, I should say. They are Congressman Don Bacon, Republican of Nebraska, Congressman Jared Golden, Democrat of Maine, and Congressman Scott Peters, Democrat of California. Congressman Bill Heisinger, Republican of Michigan, rounds out the 2023 Economic Patriot honorees, but due to an unavoidable scheduling conflict, he's not able to join us today. While the Concord Coalition this year is honoring Congressman Bacon, Golden, Heisinger, and Peters for their efforts to bring about a more sustainable and prosperous future, fiscal future for the nation, and particularly for future generations. We are proud to have them today with us. And in the next hour, we'll get their perspective on a couple of different points. One, why prompt action is needed to address the fiscal situation, why bipartisan action is the most promising approach to lasting reforms, and whether a new fiscal commission might be a way to advance both of those important goals. Joining the discussion with me today are Concord Coalition Policy Director Tori Gorman and Chief Economist Steve Robinson, both of whom have extensive experience in senior staff positions on Capitol Hill. And before we get started, I want to thank our major sponsors for today's program, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, which provides a generous annual grant to the Concord Coalition, Tenet Healthcare, the Mark Haas Foundation at the request of Stanley Schuman, and the Honorable John C. Danforth, who happens to be our co-chair. I also want to thank these other generous sponsors, Northern Trust, Roger Brenner, the Honorable Timothy Penny, the Honorable Charles Robb, and Mark Weinberger. Their contributions and those of our many grassroots donors have really been instrumental in helping us in our core mission of advocating fiscal responsibility and for the economic well-being of future generations, and we're very grateful for their support. And now I'd like to introduce our 2023 Economic Patriot honorees. Don Bacon has represented Arkansas's 2nd Congressional District since 2017. He served 30 years in the U.S. Air Force, retiring as a brigadier general. He is a Republican whip for the Problem Solvers Caucus. Jared Golden is in his 3rd term representing Maine's 2nd Congressional District. He's a member of the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum, a Democratic whip for the Problem Solvers Caucus, and co-chairs the Blue Dog Coalition. Scott Peters serves as the representative from California's 50th District. He first won election in 2012. He's co-chair of the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum along with Bill Heisinger, and co-sponsored with Heisinger the Fiscal Commission Act of 2023. Each will make a brief opening comment, and then we'll get into the discussion. We'll begin with Congressman Bacon if he's on.
Hey, thanks to the Concord Coalition for your recognition. And I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of Jared Golden, Scott Peters. Probably if I look at the top 5 Democrats I work with on fiscal matters, or really on national security matters, on anything that requires some bipartisanship, these two are in the top 5 I work with. Jared, I've served with honor group. It's a group of veterans, half Republican, half Democrat. And Scott Peters and I have worked on a lot of fiscal stuff like debt ceiling, CRs, and try to come up with some bipartisan solutions. So I'll keep my comments here to about the next 2 minutes. First of all, I'm a big fan of the Debt Commission. I proposed in 2016 when I was a challenger to make some reforms to the mandatory spending, which, by the way, is 71% of our spending. And so with 71% of our spending, you can't just balance the budget on 29%. of the discretionary budget. Because I made those proposals, I've had roughly $32 million in ads run against me in the last 4 election cycles, almost all on mandatory spending reforms that I suggested. And because of that, I think a lot of other folks refuse or don't want to make proposals or get involved in this. I think the Debt Commission is important because it allows 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats. I believe they should be more experts, more than just elected folks. It should be folks who understand mandatory spending. And it allows us to put Democrat wins and Republican wins on the table, a balanced approach for an up or down vote. And I believe that that's the only way that we're going to get this mandatory spending resolved. So I'm a supporter of this. I thank Bill Huizenga for being the sponsor on this. And when you talk about growing, was asked about talking about growing the economy. I think this involves having energy independence, trade, open trade for our agriculture, stability on regulations, investment tax credits, and we need to expand legal immigration while we do a much better job controlling illegal immigration. And finally, I just want to mention that we can't get none of this done unless we have consensus with Republicans and Democrats. The culture in Washington today is the majority party tries to do it all on their own, and then it dies a long death in the Senate, and you can't get the president's support. It just doesn't work. I wrote the Federalist Papers. Right now I'm reading Joe Grant and President Rutherford B. Hayes. And bottom line is, nothing's been done in this country without consensus building across the aisle. But yet it's our culture today not to do that. And that's why I'm a member of the Problem Solvers, why I'm a member of the Four Country Caucus. And without it, we're going to get very little done. So with that, I'll yield back, cognizant of the time I have.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you very much. It's really very much an honor to be recognized today. I've got the award that I've been given here by the Concord Coalition. It'll be proudly displayed right here in the office. It's good to see Don and be here with my my other colleagues to talk about an important issue. So I guess one thing I would point out is I've started my own kind of blog or Substack to speak directly to Mainers and to my constituents, most importantly. And my first areas of focus were talking about our national debt, how this has become a problem, and touching on many of the issues that Don Bacon was just speaking to. I did that because I thought it was really important to try and help people understand not just how large the debt problem has become and how much worse it is set to become in the future, but also to try and speak to them a little bit about why it should matter to them, not only as they look to the future, but how it is negatively impacting them today. One of those points being that America's debt is slowing economic growth today. We know that to be the case, absolutely. I think any reading of the economy would by economists and others would prove that. Another thing I always stress to my constituents about why this really matters is how it is crowding out important investments in our people and in the future of the country. So last year we spent more on servicing the debt's interest than we did on public education, transportation, and veterans healthcare services combined. That's just one small example. Untouched, our deficit problems snowballed to the point where eventually it becomes our largest expenditure. That is just the interest that we would have to pay on an annual basis. Currently, our nation's debt is about 100% of our annual gross domestic product. That's something called the debt to GDP ratio. Generally, I think you want it much lower than 100%, probably more safely, you want it in the 70s. But we're on pace in 10 years' time to have our debt be 120% of our GDP. You go much higher than that, and I think you start to see examples in history where countries really start to struggle with keeping up with the payment on their debts. So I put out a proposal that was in my Substack to try and just freeze our debt to GDP where we're at 100%, which is no easy feat. That's how big the problem has become. So that would take us roughly over 2 years' time, a reduction in our projected budget deficits of $500 billion in 2 years. But it would take $2 trillion in savings in our budget over 5 years. And ultimately, to hit the goal over 10 years, you would have to reduce our projected budget deficits by $7 trillion. So that just gives you a feel for the scale of the problem, and what type of effort it would take here in Congress just to try and hold the line and not allow for exponential growth going forward. So no more time really for kicking the can down the road, which is why my colleagues and I here continue to try and work together to get the attention of the American public, and hopefully our colleagues here in Washington as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to whoever is next.
That would be Representative Scott Peters of California.
So first of all, thanks for doing this. Thanks to the Concord Coalition. I actually appreciate your emails, and I read them. They're good summaries of where we are, and we're challenged. I mean, I saw today that Moody's has downgraded our credit rating to negative, and that's a reflection of the fact that interest payments are going up as a part of our budget. It's not going to get any cheaper. I think it's not long before we're projected to be spending more on interest payments than we are on national defense. And I'm trying to make the case why Democrats should be concerned about this, because if, like me, you're interested in something like the child tax credit, which I think would be a terrific anti-poverty, pro-family policy, you can't pay for that if you're paying all your money because you've been borrowing to pay your expenses over time. And every interest dollar that we pay is something that we did in the past with current money, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's very dangerous for us at a time too when international challenges are only getting larger. I mean, we talked about borrowing money for the pandemic in the case of an emergency, and I was making the point it's important to have a strong balance sheet so that you can meet those emergencies as they come up. Now we've got obviously we've got Ukraine, we've got what's happening in Israel and Gaza, and we've got to be concerned about Taiwan. We have to be strong. This debt is weakening us as a country, and I think people understand that conceptually, but it's hard to do something about it. Bill Huizenga and I, Jody Arrington before him, chaired the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum. We think that this idea of a commission, which is in the bill that Bill and I introduced, is a proper way to do this. There's a lot of indignation among some older members of Congress that we should be able to do it as a Congress. Well, of course we should be able to do it as a Congress, but we're not. Nice people who worked in the Congress in the 90s come in and they say, well, this is how we did it. It's a different situation. It's just not the bipartisan place filled with conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans that it used to be. We have to have some way to force us to be together, and we need a cop on the beat. So the two issues that I talk about a little bit are Medicare and Social Security and taxes. Medicare and Social Security, Social Security is upside down in 8 to 10 years. And when that happens, when those lines cross, when revenues don't cover expenses, there's automatic cuts, across the board cuts. And Democrats are very indignant. We can't cut Social Security. We can't cut Social Security. But that's the path we're on. If you wanted to cut Social Security, you would do nothing because it takes care of itself down the line. And as Democrats, you want to save the benefits. The sooner you start on that, the better off you are. Because if you get to the end point when the cut is the 23% cut is coming tomorrow, someone's going to say to you, well, how's 15% for you? And that's not the position that people who want to save Medicare and Social Security want to be in. So we got to talk about that now if we want to save the programs. Unfortunately, the groups are calling, including the White House, are calling this a death panel for Social Security. But Social Security is in the hospital bed and it needs to be treated. The other thing is about taxes. I think there's a concern that fiscal responsibility isn't just about spending, and particularly on the small amount that we control. It's about appropriate tax policy as well. A lot of us were very critical of the Trump tax cuts at a time when the economy was strong, created a huge hole in the budget. And even today, the way Republicans talk about taxes is really inappropriate. And I heard Speaker Johnson talk about the pay for the Israel supplemental, $14 billion from the IRS, when he knows darn well, and the CBO knows darn well, that every dollar that you spend on the IRS brings back two. You want to think about revenues, collecting revenues that are already owed is an important thing, but we are not having an honest conversation about that because there's no cop on the beat. The idea of a commission that would be staffed in part or would be filled in part with experts is to say, no, that's not right. Let's be honest about where the money is, where the money's going. I don't think we can have that conversation honestly without a commission with experts on it. And we're going to come up in 2025 with a lot of pressure to extend those tax cuts that the Trump administration made, Republican only. And I think we want to understand that better. We want to be honest about it. So I think Democrats should be running at this idea, and I'm hoping you can help us get them there.
Well, I'm hoping we can too. But thank you all for those introductory comments. It really set the stage very well, and set the challenge and also what's at stake. So we want to get into the discussion now. And one of the problems of trying to focus attention on the long-term fiscal challenge is that immediate things often come along and demand immediate attention. And this week is no exception, because at the end of this week, there is a funding lapse. And over the weekend, the Speaker of the House proposed a funding plan that will get consideration this week. And, I don't want to dwell on the short term, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask our honorees if you have any thoughts about, is there a path forward to avoid a funding lapse by the end of this week?
That's a question for Don.
Well, what the speaker is proposing is basically a clean CR. It's one for January 19th and another one for February 2nd. I would have been just as happy with a single date. I thought it'd be January 19th. The fact they put about 2/3 of it on February 2nd. So basically one third of the spending bills are January 19th, and about 2/3 is February 2nd. But other than that, was a clean CR. I think we're going to lose some votes because there's about 20 folks on the Republican side that hate any kind of clean CR. So to pass this, will have to be a bipartisan bill, and I think the speaker is hoping to have that bipartisan support. At this point, there's only one choice: a clean CR. Largely because we lost 3 weeks in October, and I would also say, just to be candid, some of the appropriations bills that were passed out of the Appropriations Committee that modified in the Rules Committee are such where you can't even get 218 votes out of the Republican Party because they go too far. And so, in other words, there's a realism is hitting the GOP side that you're either going to have to have a more bipartisan approach anyway, because you're never going to capture 10 to 20 of our Republicans and be able to get 218 votes at the same time. And the only way to really do this is to have a more bipartisan approach on the appropriations bills. It was one thing to pass defense approach, VA, and some of these things, but now we're getting into transportation, or education and workforce, and these are more partisan by nature. And the only way to get these done is in a bipartisan way, because you'll never get 218 votes. So I think we'll get the clean CR done this week, but we'll take bipartisan support to do it. And then we got to go back to the appropriations bills and adjust them.
If anybody,
I just say I think it's constructive. I'm glad for this. I mean, it's a tough time to have a brand new speaker. I think it's it's a critical time to avoid a shutdown. We got a brand new speaker. He's trying to serve a lot of interest within his own caucus, but I think Don's right. I mean, ultimately, the arithmetic says you got to go outside those 218 or the Republicans to find help. And I think Democrats are interested in a clean CR kind of thing. I do wonder about There's two big funding issues out there, Ukraine and Israel. I wonder how those will be handled. But I think it's hopeful that we're moving in this direction.
Well, let's turn to the topic at hand, which is the long-term fiscal challenge and how to deal with it. And let me begin with Congressman Golden. First, let me say that, we're all aware of the tragic situation that you've been dealing with in your hometown, and we know that you're very busy with that. So we really appreciate your being here to join us, and we wish all the best to the resilient people of Lewiston, Maine. I'm glad that you mentioned that note that you wrote to your constituents about the debt burden back in April, because I was really struck by it. I think it was a terrific note. And the reason I was so impressed with it is it didn't just recite a bunch of scary statistics. There are scary statistics, but it really put the debt in a broader perspective. And you mentioned some of it in your opening, talking about the economic toll and even the national security implications. So I wonder if you could just expand a little bit on that and putting the debt in a broader perspective. Is fiscal responsibility, in your view, part of an economic growth agenda and part of a national security agenda?
Well, the answer is yes, I do. I'm looking at my letter right here, and one thing I would cite to folks is that, according to some estimates, a nation's economic growth slows by roughly 0.017% for every percentage point of debt in excess of 77% of that debt to GDP ratio that I'm talking about. Of course, I told you that we're around 100%. So we're already experiencing slower economic growth as a result of the size of our national debt. That is only going to get worse with the passage of time, unless Congress really takes some steps here to reduce the growth of our annual budget deficit. That's an economic case right there. I think reducing the deficit will ultimately produce a better performing economy. From a national security standpoint, I would say that yes, I think it's an issue of national security. I had a good talk once with the former Speaker Paul Ryan, who was advocating that the problem with the national debt is from the perspective of national security, is that it often doesn't seem like it's an emergency, but it will be eventually. And when it does, I think it's often a very rapid descent, and one that the general public is unlikely to really see coming. Essentially, it's not a big problem until it's a very big and sometimes irreversible problem. Hence, it's really difficult to talk about in the here and now and get people to understand the urgency. But I don't even think you really have to argue it. You can look around the world to see what happens to some countries when their debt to GDP ratios get out of control and their economy slows too much, and then coupled with a series of global and national disasters, they suffer collapse. And just because we're as big as we are and as powerful as we are doesn't mean that it could not happen here. And I certainly hope it's not in my lifetime or my kids or their grandkids, but you can see the potential for it being out there in the not too distant future.
Let me turn now to our policy director, Tori Gorman, for a question.
Good morning, and thank you to all our members of Congress for joining us this morning. Congressman Bacon, I'm going to direct this one to you as a former brigadier general in the Air Force. I think you know something about bringing a group of people together and fighting for a common cause. Putting our national debt on a more sustainable trajectory is going to require major concessions from both parties. But from where I sit, a key foundational element is missing from negotiations, and namely that's trust. Lawmakers just don't trust each other. In your opinion, what do you think Republicans and Democrats need to see from each other to know that it's safe to begin a public dialogue on what we know are going to be tough choices? I mean, this is an issue where the public is not going to lead, unlike the border, where they've been clamoring for solutions. So lawmakers are going to have to do it. So what do you think needs to happen to get members to a place of trust and mutual respect so that we can start working on these tough issues?
Thank you, Tori. I would say, there's 18% of Congress are veterans today. And when I got elected in 2016 and stood the oath on January 3rd of 2017, my first friends on the Democrat side of the aisle were veterans. It seemed like to be it was like the way to, that's how we first met each other. Like Salute Carbajal became one of my best friends, and he's a Marine. And Jared, got to know him in 2018 when he was elected as well. And it just seems like the veterans sort of quickly bonded together, and we do have more trust across the aisle, because it is about serving America first, less about a Republican win or a Democrat win. We want to do things good for the country. I know other people do too that aren't veterans, but we do have that quick bond as veterans. I think on the debt commission, what I like about it is it's going to be Republican and Democrat wins and losses. It's going to be a mix of our priorities and some of the Democrat priorities. So I think I would assume, though I don't want to totally prejudge some of the findings of a commission, but I believe you'll look at raising the caps on taxes for withholdings for Social Security. Right now, it's capped somewhere around $140,000. Then you stop paying into Social Security. I would assume that would be adjusted. That would probably be more of a Democrat priority to do so. But I also think they'll look at maybe some of the retirement ages, maybe adjust that by a year for a long-term stability. That would be maybe more of a Republican one. I believe you got to do both, not necessarily these exact proposals, but a mix of Republican Democrat wins if you're going to secure Social Security beyond 2034. And as Scott Peters said, if we don't do anything, one day it's just going to be cut 25%. The next year it'll be cut 28%, and just keeps getting worse. And so that's not the right answer. So this will not happen without a commission, in my view. We'll go bankrupt or insolvent if we do nothing. And people are too scared to propose these solutions. I've had $32 million of ads run against me. So I think other people look at it and go, no, we're going to have to do something different. And so I think the commission's the right way to go, and will build trust. And I would also, to a broader point of your question, if you look back a decade ago or even 2 decades ago, the left side of the Republican Party significantly overlapped with the right side of the Democrat Party, to a point where you had about 20% of the Congress in that gray zone. Today, literally, there is no overlap. Jared is right on the very right side of his party, and then you go farther out, you got Fitzpatrick from the Republicans, but there's a gap there. And so we are more polarized than we've ever been. And it seems like the only goal is to win the next election. Somehow we got to make the goal of saving our country the preeminent discussion. And it's that part is missing. It's there, but it's not the priority. It's so literally on the Republican side, and I hear it on the Democrat side, it's all about who's going to be the next majority, the next Congress. Well, that doesn't work for our country. We got to solve problems. And I think in the end, the best policy is the best politics. If you're solving problems, the American people will like it.
Thank you.
And let me turn now to Steve Robinson, Chief Economist, for a question.
Yeah, I thanks all of you for being here. Congressman Peters, you mentioned in your remarks about Moody's decision last week to change its outlook on the U.S. debt to negative. There are actually 3 credit rating agencies, and it looks like Moody's is getting ready perhaps to join. As you recall, back in 2011, Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. debt from AAA to AA. And then earlier this year, Fitch did the same thing. So you now have, the 3 credit rating agencies saying that, they're concerned about the ability of the U.S. to manage its debt. And that implies to the financial markets that there's a greater risk there. And, historically, risk is associated with higher interest rates. When you have a $30 trillion national debt, every 1 percentage point interest rate increase is $300 billion a year in extra interest costs. So, you're talking about a huge burden going forward if interest rates continue to rise. What is your sense? I mean, are we at a turning point? I mean, we saw, ultra low interest rates over the last decade and a half after the financial crisis and the pandemic the Fed was able to keep interest rates very low. But we're now seeing, a couple of weeks ago, the 10-year bond was at 5%. I mean, if interest rates remain high, do you think that will be a catalyst to convince Congress that we actually, need to begin to address the debt problem?
I hope so. I mean, I don't know what's going to break it, Steve. I mean, just a year ago, we had people espousing modern monetary theory, this notion we could just print as much money as we wanted because, forget history, interest rates will never go up again. And now it's kind of a splash of cold water. There's a couple things going on that I think should concern us. One is, I think revenues are down 9%, even though the economy is strong. Something's wrong with the tax collection. We're supposed to be pulling out of it when the economy's strong, and we're not. And you see these downgrades. I think it's important. But I would just say that Don is right, that we have to do this, I think, through a commission, a bipartisan way, get this conversation going. Everyone has the instinct we have to do something, but I can't, it's hard to overstate how scared people are of the fringe and of Twitter. And so it's really hard for members of Congress to go out and say what Don just said, right? Publicly. He just said, you're gonna have to lower the retirement age, you're gonna have to raise the cap. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, well, as he said, will get $32 million of ads run against him. There's got to be a safe space for that. And so I think that there's an instinct across the Congress that we have to do something about this. Most people agree. I just suggest that it would be helpful if people could push back on those outside forces and say, look, Congress, let's get this into a commission as soon as possible, because we're really facing a crisis down the line. I think all the evidence is that way. So I hope it does push us at least into that. I'd love to see it push us into an actual problem solving, but I think that's a little bit of a bridge too far, and that right now in this point in congressional history, that the commission that Huizenga and I have proposed and that these guys have supported is the right way to go.
Well, picking up on the commission theme, it does seem to be gaining traction, because last week over in the Senate, Mitt Romney and Joe Manchin and a group of bipartisan senators introduced something very similar to the Fiscal Commission Act that Peters and Huizenga introduced. And let me ask Congressman Golden about. I think you've mentioned before that you support the commission approach as well. I'm wondering I'm wondering two things, really. One, what kind of a reaction did you get to your letter to your constituents when you proposed some very difficult solutions? Did you get some feedback on that, pro and con? And secondly, what would make for a successful commission, just in terms of the mechanics? I mean, does it need to have like an automatic vote? Does it need to have an up or down vote? Have you thought about how it would work in practicality?
Sure, thank you. In terms of feedback, I think that the communication with my constituents has been well received. It's a new conversation that I've started just this year, and I think folks back home appreciate the kind of in-depth analysis that I'm able to provide through that venue, such that even if they don't agree 100% with some of the priorities that I am setting in that conversation, or solutions that I put forward, they at least appreciate the conversation itself. So largely positive feedback, and it's been pretty well read, and people engage with it. So that's been good. I think that I mentioned a little bit the need to look at Social Security and Medicare near the end of that Substack, and of course that does frighten some people. But I thought it was important to touch upon, in order to remind people that the status quo actually sets us up for reductions in Social Security benefits, and ultimately Medicare insolvency, not far behind that, which is a real problem where would expect to see reductions in payments to healthcare providers and hospitals, and that would cause a lot of problems out there for both the healthcare system, but also for, I think, Medicare beneficiaries as well. So that's one thing that I think isn't well understood in the conversation of, reform, entitlement programs, don't touch them. Very often there's no conversation about the status quo is really a recipe for cuts. And it's not far away. And I think that is what will create the pressure for success in regards to what comes out of the commission. I think that one of the more important things to recognize is some of these deadlines for trust fund insolvency, with an understanding that there needs to be a lot of pressure created and put on Congress to act. And I think that in practice, while I like the idea of the commission and would love if it came back in this Congress or in the next Congress and proposed some steps that we all know Congress often kicks a can down the road and fails to act. But those deadlines, Social Security Trust Fund, insolvency, and Medicare's, I think will be a great source of political pressure that could lead Congress to take some steps. And so the commission has really got to focus, I think, on putting together a good report with some clear bipartisan steps that could be taken, such that it's a relevant part of that conversation when it's forced upon the Congress.
So it could really have a public education function as well as substantive.
Yeah, actually, I just add to that, the commission that we proposed is designed to give us a vote, and this is true with the Manchin-Romney proposal too, a vote without amendments up or down on the floor of each chamber. So I think Jared's right that we need something to put into action, and most people are skeptical of a commission that produces another report without a chance to vote. Let's put it to a vote. That's the idea behind this. I think that's what makes people nervous about it too.
Tori. Oh,
I just say I agree.
okay.
Gotta go up or down vote.
I'm going to go rogue here, Bob. Hope you don't mind. But we're having a conversation here about tough choices, leadership, generating trust, fiscal commission. Congressman Peters was very clear about how all policy options should be on the table. I want to talk a brief second about an experience I had as a House staffer in the late 90s, early 2000s, working for a Social Security task force. It was bipartisan. I worked for a Republican member from Arizona. My best friend worked for a Democrat from Abilene, Texas. And one of the key elements of our core group was that when one of us was attacked on Social Security, the others would come to the rescue. So when my boss, Jim Colby in Arizona, was running for re-election, was viciously attacked for his positions on Social Security reform, Congressman Charlie Stenholm, Democrat from Texas, wrote a letter to the local paper, a letter to the editor saying, you guys shouldn't be criticizing him for this. And the same thing happened 2 years later when Charlie Stenholm was getting attacked. My boss wrote a letter. Now, their respective leaderships hated that because obviously they were looking to pick up seats. But these gentlemen thought it was more important to provide a safe space, a circle of trust, if you will, to give members to talk about these tough choices. Is this idea of sort of a get out of jail free card is what we called it. Is this something that members of Congress today, those of you that are on the panel here today, might consider doing for your other colleagues here as we talk about these tough choices? Should this be something that a fiscal commission, members that are serving on the fiscal commission, should they be willing to do this on behalf of their other members of the commission in order to foment this circle of trust?
Tori, I'll jump in. By the way, when I was stationed in Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Congressman Colby was my neighbor. Up there by 8th Street, and I can't remember the intersection, but I lived a block away from them there. I think a commission would offer that top cover and umbrella. I also think being part of the problem solvers and the For Country caucus, two different caucuses, but same principles. One was veterans, one's more broad. I think that also offers us a chance to provide some defense of each other. By the way, to belong to both caucuses, we have sworn not to attack each other politically or donate to opponents. So we have a little bit of that going on right now with both of those caucuses. And And I'll be the first to say I've loved working with Jared and Scott Peters both in different capacities and different issues, but both have been outstanding people to negotiate with, good at their word, and I think they both will tell you I compliment them publicly.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is the exponential growth of spending in campaigns. So, I represent the second most rural congressional district in the country. And we saw $18 million in total spending in 2018 and in excess of $30 million in the last election cycle in 2022. So, it creates a bit of a difficulty for someone like Don to come up to my district and, hold a press conference or write an opinion piece trying to push back against tens of millions of dollars of spending. I think that the times have just changed in a negative way where those attacks around things like Social Security, Medicare are it's hard to break through all of the noise. But I also represent the oldest congressional district per capita. And among older voters, rightfully, they are very concerned about receiving their benefit. I think the good news, I often talk to people, is that Social Security Trust Fund is an easier fix than Medicare, which I've yet to fully understand. The problems with that program. It's very complex, and so are the potentially the solutions. But Social Security easier to get a handle on. But I think as you start to get down into younger demographics, people who are still years away from retirement and younger folks in particular, they're very skeptical that Social Security is even going to be around for them in the future, such that they're actually, I think, very open-minded to the need to have these discussions. And so when you look around the corner politically out there, I think that there's more pressure on elected officials to actually take seriously the need for reform, because there's a lot of folks that are saying, if you don't do anything, I'm paying into a program that I'll never reap any benefit from.
Steve.
Yeah. So Congressman Bacon, let me go back to you. We talked about the need for building trust within the Congress, but there's also a need to build trust with the public. According to the Pew Research Center, back in 1960, 80% of Americans said that they trusted the government to do the right thing, either always or most of the time. The same poll today says the number is less than 20% of Americans who trust the government. So is the public ready to accept tough choices? I mean, if they don't trust the government, are they going to be afraid that, we can argue about whether we need more taxes or spending or whatever, but I mean, if there's this lack of trust, I mean, how do you convince the public that the Congress is going to do the right thing if they really lack a fundamental level of trust?
Well, Steve, it's a terrible problem, and I don't have a good answer for it. It's not just the federal government. It's subparts like DOD. DOD used to have roughly an 80% trust factor favorable. Now it's around 50%. Still one of the most trusted institutions in our country, but it's also gone down significantly. And that's not a good sign for the world's most powerful democracy and the city on a hill for freedoms are the values that we hold dear. America has to be the indispensable nation for freedom and human dignity and all the values we embrace, because without America, the world's gonna be a much more stark place, but yet we're struggling internally. And I think there's a few factors behind this. I think the gerrymandering of our districts, where you only have like 40 really true swing districts, plays into this. But I see it more in the cable TV and I always call it the dark social media, and people get into their echo chambers and then they become more radicalized. I mean, on our side of the aisle, and I think the Democrat side of the aisle has their own radicalization going on too, but on our side, because I see it, they're being told every day our country's ready to fail because of the Democrats, and that if we don't stand up and fight, our country's going to collapse. So then you get this level of anger and intensity. And when you hear someone like me saying, hey, the founding fathers, James Madison, designed a government where you have to find areas of consensus, they don't like it because it goes against what they're hearing every day on cable and our social media. And so how do you beat that? Well, it was touched on a little bit here with Scott and Jared. one of them brought up the fact that we got to stand up and tell the truth, and it's not popular. But when you do it, a lot of folks they feel like they got a cower to this intimidation. The other week when I voted against Jim Jordan, I took 31,000 phone calls in 1 week, right? My wife was harassed. I had businesses that supported me were protested at. And what did it do to me? Well, it made me mad. But some folks were literally scared on my side of the aisle to do what I did. They told me they can't afford to have their supporters protested, their families harassed. But we need more people to be a little more of a lightning rod on this and stand up and just push back. So, for example, I support the FBI. You would swear, so the folks on my side of the aisle, I think it's a minority, that I just did a terrible thing. I believe in supporting law enforcement. I believe in law and order. That's a principle of the Republican Party that should always be there. And if we ever give that up, I think we'll be a minority for a decade to come. But they were surprised when I pushed back. I said, the FBI director, he's got problems, and we have oversight. We should call him in. There have been some overreach, like the FBI office in Richmond, Virginia, that was calling Catholics, radicals and potential, homegrown terrorists, but they should be punished. But the 99% of the FBI are great people. They're defending us against Russian agents, Chinese agents, Iranian agents, mafia, human trafficking, and we should support them. People aren't willing to say this kind of stuff enough on both sides of the aisle. And we got to break this echo chamber that people are living in with truth. And that's the only way I know how to do it. I don't know of a better way.
Can I just say 100%, Don? I think that's exactly right. I mean, the response to a lack of trust in the government's functioning is not to sit in the corner and cower. It's to get up and lead. And people are desperate for that. All the polls show that they want us to work together. And if you came up with Republicans and Democrats standing shoulder to shoulder saying, this country's got a problem, we have to solve it, people will be behind that. That's how you develop trust, right? I mean, I just think, I think that what they see, what people see, and this is exaggerated, is the fighting between Republicans and Democrats, and they're sick of it. I mean, there is a lot of that. There's too much of it. But there's also a lot of people working, sort of under the surface trying to solve problems. They don't see that. And I think the way we get trust is to make the government work. The only way to make it work is in a bipartisan way. And we can't let the campaigning get in the way of that. There's always been campaigning. But I think the idea about protecting each other on this issue makes a lot of sense. We should, we would have to tell the leadership, this is what we're going to do. Too bad. You want to beat Don Bacon, you got to do it on something other than Social Security, Medicare, because he's doing the right thing. I think that makes sense. But I hear this thing about, well, we can't do anything because people don't trust us. Baloney, quit. If that's why, what are you doing here? I live in San Diego, California. I don't come to DC for the weather. I'm here to try to help the country to solve problems. And it's not that good a job if you don't take advantage of it.
By the way, Scott, there's about $500,000 of TV ads this week on me from a dark group, anonymous group. No one knows who's funding it, but it's about me cutting Social Security. And
I know. I mean, that's BS, and I'd be happy to respond to that. By the way, Don, I voted against Jim Jordan. I didn't get quite the same reaction as people seem pretty happy with me.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left or so, and picking up on that leadership theme, we just and trust theme, we just celebrated Veterans Day over the weekend. So I wanted to address this question to Air Force General Bacon and Marine Infantryman Golden, but Mr. Peters is welcome to answer as well. You're both members of the For Country Caucus. You mentioned it before. I'm just wondering, is there something about that service, that military service, that makes you approach national public policy issues from a different perspective? And do you think that there is a role for the growing number of veterans in Congress in helping forge consensus on addressing some of our major challenges?
How about I
rank first? We'll go with Congressman Bacon.
Oh, you're gonna go with me first, okay? Jared's the chairman right now. Well, I guess you're not.
Oh, okay. Well,
He was the chairman of the Four Country Caucus. So was I. We got 2 new members now. Okay, I'll jump in. 2 things I would say. First of all, being a veteran has helped me understand the importance of NATO. I understand Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. I've served in the Far East, so I lived on 4 different continents. And so I feel like it gives me a level of credibility in the Armed Services Committee to address certain issues. So I would say, first off, just having 30 years roughly military experience, to include in the nuclear deterrence area, it's given me a chance to make a difference, speaking out on what I think is needed there. So having people that been there and have background in it, it makes a difference. But I think more to your point, I think 90% of us that are veterans, and there's a few exceptions that have gone way on the partisan side, but most of us, we'd like to sit down, we can look each other in the eye and deal with the problem and figure out, what's best for the country? And I feel like Jared and I have been able to do that. Salute Carbajal and I, and Jimmy Panetta, Chrissy Houlihan. These are all some of the Democrats of the Four Country Caucus. We can sit down and solve problems. We still got our values, whether they're the Democrat side or Republican side, but we can find that space in there where we can operate. So as a case in point, quality of life. The military is struggling with pay. We have 15% of our enlisted people on food stamps or having to go to food banks. Our housing is struggling. Our barracks are struggling terribly. Just got an F on a GAO report on our barracks and dormitories. So I'm the chair of the Quality of Life panel. I work with Chrissy Houlihan. She's the ranking member. It is one of the most bipartisan things you're ever going to find in Congress, because we're here to solve a problem. And I think it's just one example. We have a group of us, Republicans and Democrats, that know that we got to solve housing, barracks, pay. We got a 1-year waiting list for childcare. Our medical stats, metrics have gone down in the last 2 or 3 years. We got to turn that around. And the largest unemployed segment of America are military spouses. We got to hopefully get a job, because they're not getting paid enough in the military to put food on the table. So we got to facilitate these spouses getting jobs. And those are not Republican or Democrat issues. Those are American issues. And that's where I think the veterans can come together.
That's a great group of vets. It's the kind of third organization I'm involved in that is bipartisan in nature. It is sometimes more interesting in that a lot of the members tend to be more ideologically a little further left or right rather than more kind of pragmatically middle. But the caucus really exists to focus on supporting our national security, on supporting our service members and their families, some of those quality of life issues that Don was just talking about, and then to support our veterans. So it has a more limited, more narrow focus than some other bipartisan groups. I guess all I would say is that there's been some people who have focused, like Arthur Brooks wrote the book Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt. And he talks a lot about, particularly in the political space, how literal contempt for the other side has led to a place where bipartisan compromise is nearly impossible and strongly disincentivized. And I guess one observation I would make is that for veterans, all of whom are proud of their service to the country, and no doubt learned some of the most important lessons of their life while doing that, it's pretty hard to hold your fellow veterans in contempt, such that we have respect as the foundation of our ability to work together, regardless of party. And I think that is pretty important. Also, just, Don mentioned that I was the co-chair, and so is he. We've actually set up our own bylaws such that we have to have new co-chairs every Congress. And that's an acknowledgement of the fact that everyone that goes into the service learns how to be a leader and is capable of leading. But it's also an ethos. Within the squad, everyone has to be prepared to lead and do their part and be able to step up and do the job of others. And I think that ethos is an important one as well. And veterans carry that into Congress, such that, for me anyways, and I think it's true probably for Don and others, I hate to put words in his mouth, but I doubt he would disagree. The proudest service I've ever done the country was my military service. It's an honor to represent people in Congress, but you got to be able to see the bigger picture and be proud of the service that you do here when it's all said and done. And I think a lot of veterans have that mentality such that they're not constantly thinking about reelection, and understanding that they've already done their biggest service to the country. They're willing to keep serving, but they're going to do it on their own terms. And I think, without fear of reelection. And that's an important mindset that I think many veterans have as well.
We're going to have to wrap things up, but I want to turn to Congressman Peters to maybe take us out on an optimistic note. You seem relentlessly optimistic, and that's a good thing. So what keeps you going? What gives you hope?
Well, as I said, I'm from San Diego, so I must be optimistic to get on the plane every week and fly all the way out here. But no, I think, look, this is, so Wayne Gretzky said, skate to where the puck is going. This commission is where the puck is going. There's no really way around it. The speaker's talked about it. He didn't put it in this last plan, but now there's a Senate companion. The issue is really in the way of discussion about other policy issues, and I think it's going to happen. But what we just would encourage you to be engaged, to educate people about this, because there's lots of folks who still don't see that it's a problem. And as mad as I was about the Trump tax cuts, I mean, every year we're borrowing the same amount just to pay our expenses, as that costs us in the deficit. So we got to get out of this habit, and we can do it. We'll need some encouragement. I'm very optimistic that this comes about, and we're gonna get it right. It's too important.
Well, that's unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's discussion. But I want to thank again the Concord Coalition's 2023 Economic Patriot Award winners, Congressman Don Bacon, Congressman Jared Golden, Congressman Bill Heisinger, who could not be with us today because of a scheduling conflict, and Congressman Scott Peters. And thanks again to our major sponsors, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, the Mark Haas Foundation, Tenet Healthcare, and Senator John C. Danforth. That's all the time we have. As I said, I'm Bob Bixby, Executive Director of the Concord Coalition. Thank you all for watching. And if you want to hear more discussions like this, you can tune in to our weekly podcast called Facing the Future, available at concordcoalition.org. Thank you again. Thanks for watching. Thanks to our honorees. Thanks to Tori and Steve. And have a nice day, everyone.